The Israel-Palestine conflict has been raging for more than 70 years. Numerous peace attempts have been made at a state level, but it seems all political approaches are failing. McLean, an Orthodox Jew, is engaged in interfaith work between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Israelis and Palestinians as a director of Jerusalem Peacemakers. He is actively engaged in seeking peaceful solutions beyond politics.
Politicians are a big part of the problem rather than the solution. It's true that they are part of the obstacle, but I would say they also reflect the very real fears that both people have. We Israelis fear for survival and existence with terror attacks and rockets, and Palestinians have their fear of survival, and that we need our politicians to certainly be willing to carry our people beyond our lowest common denominator, and to call upon the peace leaders and the religious peacemaker community, to guide them how we can not just connect our societies on the lowest common denominator of fear and separation, but to a higher vision.
Palestinian and Israeli memories of the pain and suffering may serve to fuel the conflict. It will not be easy for anyone to forgive or forget the harm that has been done or to rebuild trust. A vital missing component in the peace process seems to be the people's willingness to understand and communicate with each other.
We in Jerusalem Peacemakers have found that the key language for bringing together these two people is not just to resort to secular Western educated politicians in Israeli and Palestinian society, encouraged by the UN and US Secretaries of States and Presidents to negotiate peace treaties in places like Oslo or Washington, D.C., but that you have to also bring in the religion and the faith element in order to build a bridge. The biggest obstacle that came through all of these conflict and in recent years is that both societies have gotten very cynical and skeptical that peace and hope is possible. And so the reality is that the prevailing atmosphere in the wider societies is skepticism, is despair, is fear, is a lack of trust. I don't think our work is in denial of that greater reality of fear and separation between the two societies. It's just that there's a core group who are keeping the flame of hope alive, and I would use a metaphor of planting seeds for the future.
Instead of launching projects for direct solutions, his work with many organizations focuses on bringing people together and fostering understanding and improving harmonies. Eliyahu organizes many events attended by thousands of Israelis, Palestinians, and international participants who gather for the purpose of dialogue and reconciliation. He runs weekly tours in Hebron and Jerusalem, enabling a full view of the conflict from both sides. He is also planning to launch a new tour along the Gaza border.
For the last 7 years, I've been running out of Abraham Hostel in Jerusalem a weekly tour called the Hebron Dual Narrative Tour, where I bring international travelers to Hebron, and I co-run this tour together with a Palestinian tour company and an Israeli tour company, Visit Hebron Palestine and Abraham Tours, where travelers will, for half a day, have a Palestinian Muslim guide, and they'll hear the Palestinian narrative on the conflict, and then I will guide the Jewish side, and in one day they'll be hearing a Palestinian perspective of occupation, what it's like to live under military occupation, and then on my side I will introduce travelers to both army and the members of the Jewish community of Hebron, that they're also called the settlers, to hear within one day the whole spectrum of viewpoints, and certainly the emotions about the conflict and the situation. Hebron is a perfect laboratory in one day, if you only have one day, to try to see a perfect example on the ground of how complicated our whole situation is. And I'm also starting a new tour project called the Gaza Border Reality Tour. We'll be visiting Israeli communities on the border of Gaza and hearing our experience, because it's also part of my own family's lived experience of living under rocket fire and reality and the fear of tunnels and kites being sent over the border, and also talking and with people in Gaza to hear their lived reality. So part of the tour will be a Skype call like the one we're having each week with a speaker in Gaza to hear life, what life is like from their perspective of living under siege, and so we'll hear both sides as well. In addition to running monthly events in Jerusalem together with a coalition of other interfaith organizations, and one of the main projects we do is a monthly event that we call Praying Together in Jerusalem, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims gather at King David's tomb, which is also the site of the Last Supper room, according to the Catholic and Greek Orthodox traditions anyway. And on the roof of King David's tomb, we do a monthly prayer event where religious Jews, religious Muslims, and religious Christians pray side by side for the peace of Jerusalem.
Unfortunately, most media reports on Israel and Palestine focus only on the conflict and the bad news. And therefore, the impression most international audiences receive is that Palestinians and Israelis are only interested in fighting.
All the politicians I would say the three major parties, Israeli government, Palestinian Authority, and Hamas, who I would say all of them, share blame for the crisis that we're in. And I would also add that media is also part of the problem. That for 20 years of countless, literally, I've myself organized probably hundreds of encounter meetings, interfaith prayer events. We used to do an annual event called the Jerusalem Hug, an interfaith prayer for peace around the walls of the old city. And I would speak myself to the bureau chiefs of almost every media department I could find that's based in Jerusalem, whether it's European media, Israeli, or Arab world media. They would say, "Oh, we would love to report on your event. Let me ask the reporter would ask their bureau chief, and the bureau chief of every media outlet we could think of would always say, "Oh, you're free to cover that event, but as long as there's no other more pressing news." And the next day, there's always something, whether a tank fire across the border to Gaza, or a suicide bombing in Jerusalem, or something going on in Syria, or there's always bad news to report. But who has time to cover positive things that bring together the Israelis and Palestinians and show a positive shared future rather than a fear-based future.
Eliyahu hopes one day these small events and projects can become a mass movement for peacemaking across the Holy Land, the Middle East, and the world.
So I would agree. The critics say, well, your efforts don't reach a mass of people. And I would say that's a fair criticism, that we need to create the conditions for the politicians to call upon the work that we are doing already and implement on a much larger scale. No matter how bad the headlines are of the day, are working together hand in hand to envision a shared future, and not just in a theoretical way, but in a practical way, with ongoing meetings, encounters, and projects to build bridges and build a vision of a shared future where Israeli Jews are not seen as colonial foreign occupiers, and we Israelis don't see our Arab and Palestinian neighbors as a threat to our existence, but actually a blessing sent by Hashem, sent by God, that our Palestinian neighbors and friends deserve equality and dignity and respect.